Hi class, today we're going to review the figures of speech as we saw them used in Speak by Laurie Halsey Anderson. The 5 figures of speech that we've been looking at are metaphor, simile, symbol, personification, and imagery. And you might remember this slide because we used it at the beginning of the unit when we talked about how we were going to pay attention to these things as we read. So I think the key thing I want you to remember here is that all language is really metaphor. All language is trying to make comparisons. The key in literary metaphor and simile is that the objects being compared must be unlike. That means they aren't similar already. And by making a comparison to something that they are not actually like, we are creating a new sense of meaning and understanding. All language works this way, and the better we get at it, the better we are able to communicate. So let's get started. In this first slide, we are going to talk about metaphor. This is where we compare two unlike things, and we say one thing literally is the other thing. And so Anderson uses her language to give us insight into Melinda's characters, and these metaphors show some humor and some wit in the main character's personality. In the first one, she tells us she dives into the stream of fourth period lunch students and swims down the hall to the cafeteria. And so one thing we notice immediately is that students aren't literally swimming down the hall. So we definitely have unlike things. What are those two unlike things being compared? In this case, it's the hallway being compared to a stream. And so we see the way this metaphor works, and it's actually creating an image or an idea of what the traffic pattern of students is like here, maybe the flow of the school. In the second example, Mr. Neck storms into class, a bull chasing 33 red flags. We have a couple things going on here. We have Mr. Neck being compared to a bull, but we also have students being compared to 33 red flags. So let's break it down a little bit here. What might this be saying about Mr. Neck if we're comparing him to a bull? Well, it's probably saying that he's forward and aggressive. Bulls are pushy and charging towards the red flags. And so what are red flags? Well, typically we know that red symbolizes danger or stop, and so do red flags. If you know anything about auto racing, the red flag says this is the caution lap, right? And so Mr. Neck chasing these 33 red flags could ultimately be a symbol of his role as the aggressor or the force in charge of stopping the danger. And so he sees students as these dangers. In the next example, Melinda states, "Mother is the rock, I am the ocean." In this metaphor, mother is the rock, she sees her mother as the solid force. Rocks are usually symbols of something that ground people and ideas. Melinda, though, sees herself in this metaphor as the ocean. She sees herself as vast and moving, maybe unknown and expansive, yet forceful and forever. This might be symbolic of the great power Melinda desires, or perhaps it is symbolic of how she feels lost in the vast expanse, like the ocean. Maybe she even feels a little bit of the tumult, the tossing and turning of the waves. In the next example, she refers to her parents as arguing, and she says, "A simmering argument, a few bubbles splashing on the stove." I really like the arguing metaphor, this simmering on the stove. It really works to show that it isn't a hostile situation, but rather maybe it's one that she says bubbles up. That's that kind of nagging, lingering discontent of two passive-aggressive people. At least that's the sense I get from it. In this final metaphor, she says, when describing her feelings of isolation, "I stand in the center aisle of the auditorium, a wounded zebra in a National Geographic special." In this example, she is discussing herself as on display. And what's on display is her wound or her injury. So there's a couple things to look at here. The first is she chooses a zebra. And by choosing a zebra, she's illustrating this idea of our stripes. And our stripes tend to be what make us different, or the thing that we cannot hide, maybe. And I find this interesting to make the comparison of herself to the zebra. But she recognizes that she's wounded and injured. And we also know now that this is true based on the trauma that occurred to her. But the final part, and the part that I really like, is the part where she says she's in a National Geographic special, because this really signifies that she feels like she's on display for everyone to see her suffering. Let's look at the next examples. These are similes, and in similes we use like or as to make that same kind of comparison where we say one thing is like or as the other thing. And remember, the key is these things have to be unlike in the first place. So the first is she uses humor when she states, "Dad snorts like a bull." Again, she's using this bull imagery. When we see an idea repeated, like the bull, we should start to pay attention to it, because oftentimes authors will use a similar symbol or a similar metaphor throughout the text to create a motif. And I really think that she might be showing how she sees male aggression right now, specifically after what happened to her with Andy. So I think the bull is really a symbol of aggression and danger, even though in this case she's using it to mock her dad, to talk about how he snorts. In the second example, Nicole is unstoppable at field hockey. She motors downfield so fast, she creates a wake of flowing mud that washes over anyone who gets in the way. In this example, we see her respect for Nicole's athletic ability. This simile creates a clear image of the force that Nicole is. I think maybe Melinda longs to have a little bit of power like that, the kind of power that a wake of flowing mud could create, washing over anyone that gets in the way. So I think we see her respect for Nicole, but maybe even a little longing, a little healthy envy, I guess. In the next example, she says, "It looks like I arm wrestled a rose bush." This, of course, is describing Melinda's self-inflicted wounds that we know are a common symbol of trauma. When people experience trauma, especially young people, they often do self-harm. And we read about that a little bit in RAIN, the website on our nonfiction analysis. But in this particular metaphor, I think we see the idea that the scratches and scars she has self-inflicted were an attempt to both feel and deaden her pain at the same time. And I don't know if you remember, but her mother's response when she came into the kitchen with her thorny, scratched up arms was, "Melinda, I don't have time for this." And so I think that's really a symbol of where Melinda was at this point in her traumatic experience. In the next example, she describes her friend Heather like a dog that just keeps jumping in your lap. This metaphor describing Heather shows the way Melinda sees her, maybe too friendly or too loyal, although we know later that changes for Melinda and Heather. And finally, in this last example, we see Melinda describing Miss Keene as looking like a basketball. And so this one is probably the most obvious of all, and it lets us know that Miss Keene is round. One final note that I'd like to make about symbols is pay attention to the characters' names. Do you think it's all significant that Mr. Freeman, the art teacher, the person who helps her finally express herself, is named Mr. Freeman? And if that's true, then what might it mean that this teacher's name is Ms. Keene? So just to think about that as we talk about symbols and imagery. In this example, we see both imagery and symbols. The tree and the mirror are both symbols, and this entire description is very rich for the senses, and that, of course, is how we create imagery. Melinda says, I look for shapes in my face. Could I put a face in my tree, like a dryad from Greek mythology? Two muddy circle eyes under black dash eyebrows, piggy-nosed nostrils, and a chewed-up horror of a mouth. Definitely not a dryad face. I can't stop biting my lips. It looks like my mouth belongs to someone else, someone I don't even know. I get out of bed and take down the mirror. I put it in the back of my closet, facing the wall. We already talked in our discussion questions about what that mirror might represent. And we obviously know it's the way she feels about herself right now, so much so that she's putting it in the back of the closet facing the wall because she doesn't want to see it right now. She's not ready to look at that mirror as a result of her trauma. But trees and plants in general are powerful symbols because of the life, strength, and fertility that they represent. And although she originally draws trees that have died after being struck by lightning, just as she believes that her life stopped after her rape, Melinda eventually moves on to creating trees that are living and thriving. As Melinda's life and mind become less desolate and hopeless, she moves closer and closer to being able to create her work of art. The imagery is rich in this example. The muddy circles under her eyes, the black dash eyebrows, the piggy-nosed nostrils, and the chewed-up horror of a mouth. These are great appeals to our senses in helping us understand what Melinda is both feeling and experiencing. Let's look at our next example. Again, we're going to look at some symbols and images, and this example has a really good example of personification as well. I stumble from thorn bush to thorn bush, my mother and father who hate each other, Rachel who hates me, a school that gags on me like I'm a hairball, and Heather. I just need to hang on long enough for my new skin to graft. Mr. Freeman thinks I need to find my feelings. How can I not find them? They're chewing me alive like an infestation of thoughts, shame, mistakes. In this example, Melinda's parents are being metaphorically compared to thorn bushes, jagged edges who brush up against leaving their scars. And her friends are the thorn bushes that hate her. She also adds the metaphor, I am a hairball, and explains it as the school is gagging on her. She is stuck in the throat of the entire school, a nagging problem. The personification of her feelings happens at the end. She says her feelings are chewing her alive. And of course, we know that feelings can't chew, so this is the example of how we give human qualities to some idea or object that isn't actually human. In this last slide, we're going to look at symbols and imagery one more time. And in this flashback memory and apple tree reference, we see a time in Melinda's life when she felt safe. We get that idea when she talks about the bees being so content that they didn't bother to sting her. So you can see that she didn't feel like she was in any danger at all. We see her contentment in this memory with the warmth of the sun, the safety of her father's arms, despite the pushing wind, and she smiles. The last idea that I want to point out here is that idea of the wind pushing her mother. While wind can actually create a force, the notion of it physically pushing someone on purpose isn't literal. So in this case, the wind might be personified, able to physically push her mother into her father's arms, which might actually be a symbolic idea that she's longing for. Maybe she'd like to see her parents in a more healthy relationship like this memory invokes. I hope this review helped you with our figures of speech.